Hello, friends, and welcome to the May 13th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about policy issues here in our great state and have a conversation about how you can engage in that process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and we have a hopeful episode for you today as we discuss reasons for optimism in the climate policy world as we welcome Dr. Joshua Rhodes to the program. Dr. Rhodes is with the University of Texas Weber Energy Group, and along with his team of researchers, recently released a report detailing how Texas could get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 while improving the Texas economy. Next, we'll be joined by former Texas Impact intern, now CEO of Pecan Street, Suzanne Russo, to discuss their work and research and policy recommendations to improve climate outcomes. And to kick us off, we'll begin with a weekly word from another former Texas Impact staffer, Reverend Sam Brannon with St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Elgin. But before we get to the program, I want to share a couple of quick thoughts at the top. First, thanks as always to all who've reached out with comments, questions, and suggestions for the podcast. We love to hear from you. I'll be looking for your emails at scott@texasimpact.org. And help us out by subscribing, sharing, and inviting a friend to listen. First, a reminder that early voting is May 16th through 20th for the May 24th primary runoff election. You can vote in the runoff for the primary election you voted for in the March primaries. If you didn't vote, you can vote in either primary. Y'all, there are very important elections on the ballot, and very few people will show up. So I hope we'll take this one seriously. We have talked about elections on this program several times in the last few months, so go check out those episodes and share them with a friend. Today, we're going to be a little more hope-filled, but remember that every issue we discuss on this program will be impacted by elections, both this May election and the general elections in November. So even if we aren't talking about voting today, I hope we'll all keep it front of mind this week. With that, today we'll be talking about opportunities to address the climate crisis. Y'all, I don't care where you are in Texas, it's hot. We seem to be setting new records every day, and the grid is a concern still for many Texans. But there are opportunities. And those who try to pit the economy against the climate are selling a false narrative, as today's guests will share. So I hope we don't geek out too much on this episode, and I hope you can all find some useful information to share and act on. And with that, here we go. The Weekly Word with Reverend Sam Brannon.
Hello, dear friends. This is Sam Brannon, the pastor at St. Peter Lutheran Church in Elgin, Texas. You might remember me as the director of the Water Captains program that we operated out of Texas Impact for several years. Today's devotion will center on water and the Word. Although I'm not sure why, my favorite place is the desert. I find it fascinating and spiritually enthralling. It's where God's people were gifted with the law and a land. It's where the water came gushing out of the rock. It's where God made a promise, and that promise was delivered. Water, or the lack thereof, seems to be the most operative issue on the landscape in the desert, and often it's not even there. Water leaves a ghost-like imprint on the landscape. If you were to step back and take a look at the Pecos River Basin, for instance, you would see that the basin is very wide, very flat, and very old. Water has been flowing down the Pecos River Basin toward the Rio Grande for eons. And yet often enough, the water snakes through that river basin, and it's just a little thin brown ribbon of water. Nevertheless, you cannot deny the water. When it comes, you cannot stop it. The land stands as a testament to the water that flows and to the water that is absent. And that's the problem we have in Texas with our water. We don't think about it until it's gone. We assume it will run out of the spigot as long as we turn on the water faucet. Water is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Its ghost imprint is all over the land and all over the development of that land by humans. And yet, it's the one thing that no one talks about because we assume it's always going to be there. For instance, currently the Texas Panhandle is suffering another major drought, and according to Texas state water planners, many farmers will not be able to continue to ply their trade in another 50 years. Whether or not the land will be inhabitable by humans is a different story altogether. However, irrigating row crops as we currently do will not be possible in 50 years if we continue to draw down the Ogallala as we currently do. The drought of 2011, one of the most intense droughts in Texas history, caused farmers to draw down the Ogallala aquifer at an unprecedented rate. It did not recover because the pumping continued unabated. It continues today as we draw down this prehistoric water supply in feet, and it is replenished in inches. There are many things that dry up our Texas water supply. Row crop farming in the Panhandle and in the deserts of West Texas is only one part of the problem. The lightning-fast, burgeoning suburbs of many Texas cities are another source of drinking water depletion. Many of these homes are growing a crop of a very different variety that is quite useless, namely sod and turf grass. We pump the water from the surface and subsurface locations, process that water, and then pour much of it back out on the ground. Much of that water is evaporated back into the air because of poor irrigating techniques. Many farmers are adopting drought-tolerant crops or using cover crops to maintain soil moisture levels. Farmers are just as interested in replenishing aquifers as anyone else. And that's why our groundwater and surface water governance is more important than ever. People of faith can come forward as honest brokers in this effort with the Texas Water Development Board. Each regional meeting of the 13 regions has opportunities for the public to speak and a seat for a member of the public at large. It would be a good idea for you to take several hours out of your monthly calendar to make your own voice known and heard about the importance of water planning, water conservation in your particular part of Texas. The public's voice is more important than ever. And so, we pray. Heavenly Creator God, you created this earth for our benefit, and we truly do benefit from it. We owe our very existence to a very small amount of fresh water that is available for our consumption by humans, wildlife, livestock, and crops, all necessary for our survival. We ask you, Lord, to give us strength to stand with the water of this land that does not belong to us, but is a gift from you, and we are stewards of it. Give us courage to stand with the land that needs the water, and to give us grace to live amongst one another and to share water equitably with all of the people and the creatures and the land that need it to survive. Amen.
This week's episode was brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, and the COVID Collaborative.
Joining us for today's conversation is Dr. Joshua Rhodes, who is a research associate with the Weber Energy Group at the University of Texas at Austin and a founding partner at Idea Smiths LLC. We're going to talk about some of his exciting research here momentarily, but Joshua, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you were part of a team of energy scientists at the University of Texas at Austin that issued a report saying that Texas could eliminate its carbon pollution in fewer than 30 years. I like that. And that decarbonizing would actually strengthen the state's economy. Is that top line takeaway correct? Did I say that okay? And how did you get to this conclusion?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's generally, what we found. We found that, it's technologically possible to, to reduce, to take Texas to net zero in terms of carbon emissions, while also, strengthen the economy, having, higher levels of GDP growth than the business as usual, where we do not do that.
I assume this answer is obvious to most of our listeners, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why is this important?
Yeah, so it's important for a couple of reasons. So one being that the science is telling us that, all the carbon emissions that we've released in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution are warming the planet. And warming the planet will mean, less predictable weather, changes in climate, and that can lead to hardships in terms of like how we've developed our societies around, typical weather patterns and growing seasons and things like that. And not only us here, kind of in the rich Western part of the world, but this is a global impact. And so it will also hurt, the least of those among us, those that, don't have the money to be able to adapt like we will necessarily in the West, but, and it create a lot of climate refugees and things like that, and people having to leave places where they've in the past been able to make a living, but are no longer able to do so. And even folks like the Department of Defense have, shown that climate change can be, a conflict multiplier in regions. And so, increasing conflicts and things like that. So that's one thing. And the other is, well, this kind of the way the rest of the world is moving. And, Texas has supplied energy to the world for decades. And if we're going to continue to do that, then we need to be on the same page as the rest of the world.
And many of our listeners are Texans of faith. And I think we have seen through mission programs, both here in the United States and throughout the world, that there is definitely an impact on marginalized communities or whenever these storms happen. And as somebody who lives in the Houston area, I'm honestly kind of tired of having a 500-year flood like every other year.
Yeah,
now.
right.
But I think the second piece of that is also an important part of the conversation, maybe even just from a political standpoint here in the state of Texas. But my family was an oil and gas family. We have a ton of people. I grew up in a house funded by the oil and gas industry. And there are a lot of jobs here in the great state of Texas that are reliant on those jobs. So talk to us about the second part of your finding that this could actually benefit the state's economy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, economies are constantly, changing over time. I mean, we didn't always have all of these oil and gas jobs in Texas. We went from other types of jobs, more subsistence, farming, ranching, things like that. And then we've, moved on to energy production. And while Texas has been an energy production state is basically the energy state, for a long time, we've also changed, the types of energy that we've, consumed. We've been doing oil and gas for a long time, but we've also been getting into renewables. We have the most wind installed of any state. We're quickly catching up to California in terms of solar. Like we have vast resources in, these new energy technologies that, we're also taking advantage of. So that sector has also always changed over time. And I think that's, what we will see is like, we're still going to have energy jobs in this state. We're still going to be the energy state. I just think some of those jobs are probably going to transition to, over the next few decades, will transition or can transition to other forms of energy, other cleaner forms of energy. Because, I mean, we've already seen a few examples where some of the natural gas we produce has not been accepted in places like Ireland and France, given the environmental footprint that it has. And so if we're going to continue to want to supply the world with energy, we need to make sure that it's the kind of energy that the world wants. And if we do that, we'll also have the jobs. They may be different, but we'll still, we think, have more jobs.
Your team studied 4 different scenarios to get to net zero. So can you talk us through those 4 scenarios, and was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, so we looked at 4 scenarios, and we had kind of a counterfactual, like business as usual. We do not go to net zero scenario. So we ended up with 4 where we get to net zero. One of them is like a highly electrified future. So we basically everything that we possibly can, we electrify, whether that be heating or stoves or light and heavy duty vehicles and things like that. And so that also causes the electricity sector to grow. So we need more power plants, we need more transmission lines, and that those take jobs to build those things as well, to maintain and to have that kind of thing. And so we electrify the economy as much as we can. There's still some hydrogen and other types of fuels that are even in our electrification scenario, because we're basically all parts of the economy have to get to net zero. And it even does include some things like some direct air capture for mopping up some of those really, really hard to abate emissions in the future. And so that was one of the scenario, and that's a kind of a typical scenario that other folks that are looking at other net zero some studies, whether they be at state level or country level or world level, also look at. And so we did that by 2050. We had another scenario that was similar, except we forced the electricity grid to get to zero by 2035. So we still had the net zero of the entire economy by 2050, but we made the electricity grid get to zero by 2035, so 15 years sooner. So that did have us down a few different pathways in terms of like where we see technologies being available. And so that was the second scenario, the second net zero scenario. We had another one where we went kind of really heavy in on hydrogen. It still had a lot of like electrification in there, but a lot of vehicles, heavy duty vehicles, like industrial processes, things like that went towards hydrogen. That hydrogen generally was green hydrogen, meaning it was created by electrolysis, which is the splitting of water into, water's H2O. It's got hydrogen and oxygen. We split water into hydrogen and oxygen. We capture the hydrogen and use that. That's an electrically intensive process. So the electricity grid also grew quite a bit during that because we needed a lot of electricity to make that hydrogen for that scenario. And then we had our last scenario, which is a scenario that I don't think really anyone has ever done before. But I still think it was pretty interesting in terms of we basically let the economy just do what it basically a business as usual economy. And then we just kind of clean up the rest of it using direct air capture. So we still emit a lot of emissions, gasoline powered vehicles and like fossil fuel power plants, industrial processes. But then we actually deploy an entire sector of the economy that sucks that carbon out of the air and sequesters it. And it's kind of our, what we called internally our make a mess and clean it up scenario. But it's not that far away from what we do with things like water and trash today. We make a mess and we pay someone else to clean it up. So I mean, while it may sound, it's kind of one of our more out there scenarios, but that's kind of the way we do some of the other sectors of our economy already.
Right. So anything that surprised you with the findings? Yeah,
I mean, really, I think the thing is that kind of surprised us is like, I mean, and we were hoping to see it, but we weren't sure given, running through the multiple models, but like these futures grew better. Our gross domestic or gross state product grew better under these scenarios than a business as usual where we, don't implement, this type of thing. And so I think that was one of the positive things that we saw that, we can decarbonize the economy and it doesn't tank the economy in the process.
What do you hope listeners or what do you hope the general public will do with this report?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and I think one of the important things to say kind of about this report is, these are scenarios, not projections. We're not saying this is what will happen. We're just saying, this is a pathway that could happen, under these assumptions and under this type of policy. So, I mean, I think, the takeaway for like the normal, folks is that like this is something that's possible and it's not necessary and it's not a, death sentence for jobs and death sentence for the economy. I think sometimes, these types of things get put into black and white, binary, yes or no, way of looking at them. But I don't think that that's necessarily, the best way of looking at it. I think it's, somebody can take heart that we can transition even the Texas economy, which is an energy economy, to the future, and there will still be jobs.
We'll post the report in the show notes, but is this the kind of thing that you would hope that listeners or members of the general public would take to visits with their legislators over the course of the next few months?
I think it's an important document in terms of, basically, kind of pushing back upon, the narrative that says that like doing this will tank the economy and this is, terrible for Texas and all of this kind of thing. I mean, again, these are scenarios, not projections. We're not saying this is what will happen. We're saying this is what, could happen. And under this pathway, there's still jobs, there's still all of that kind of thing. So I think, if listeners do care, for those listeners that, care about the environment, care about reducing carbon emissions, all those kinds of things, I think it's a powerful, study to be able to use to assuage some of the, the things that, are typically used as criticism against that type of policy.
All right, Dr. Rhodes, I just have to let you know that people in our office were geeking out about this next toy that I think you've provided them. Spent probably way too much time in the office playing with this, but can you talk to us about the Texas Energy Policy Simulator and how Texans can use that tool?
Yeah. So, we didn't want this to be, a report that just sits on the shelf. I mean, it's over 100 pages. Like, it can be pretty dense at times. I mean, we did our best to, be engineers that actually, put together words that people can understand.
Yeah,
but
right.
like, we also created, I think, a web-based tool called the Texas Energy Policy Simulator. And so this essentially allows people to basically kind of choose your own adventure, right? So we came up with some scenarios that get us to net zero or reduce carbon emissions. But we also, created a tool that allow people to try out their own assumptions of, what different types of policies, would do and what their impact would be. And so one can go to this tool and you can, try out a suite of policies. You can even, edit them if you want to get a little bit deeper into the weeds. You can even make them more intense or less intense than, we currently have them. But it essentially hoping to give people like, kind of the agency to be able to, speak more intelligently about certain things, and, turn over some of the, stuff that sometimes gets put in the ivory tower, if you will, and make it more accessible to those. But yeah, you click buttons and you change things and these lines move and all this kind of stuff and the numbers change. And it's like, it's always it makes for a good experience.
Well, I will look forward to hearing how that turns out for everybody. Let us know. Joshua Rhodes, anything you'd like to leave us with today?
Yeah, as one of the things, like, also as a person of faith, I mean, one of the things that like really kind of, drives the reason I study this type of thing is that like, a changing climate is going to impact the least among those of us, like in this country and, around the world. And so, I think it's really important that, we take it seriously because, if we're going to be, those hands and feet, this is one of the ways we can do that.
Well, bonus points to anybody who closes us out with a Matthew 25 reference. But Dr. Rhodes, thank you so much for your work. Thanks for the time today. And we'll look forward to hearing reports back from everyone about how they use the tool. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Joining us for today's conversation is Pecan Street CEO Suzanne Russo, and we'll talk about Pecan Street and their incredible work in a minute. But Suzanne, before we jump in, I feel like I have to disclose the fact that before you were big timing it with Pecan Street, you were a Texas Impact intern. And I said before it came on, I'm not going to date us. I'm not going to say what years you were here, but we were interns together back in my graduate school days. And it certainly bring back some old memories having you on today. So thanks for the time. And how are you feeling?
Thanks, Scott. I'm so thrilled to be here. Have remained a huge fan of Texas Impact over the years, obviously following everything you and B and the team have been doing. So I'm thrilled to get reconnected and be able to chat with you a bit about our mutual work.
Well, I am glad that we're both in better offices than we were back in those early Texas Impact days. That was kind of a dump, but don't tell B. So we'll leave it at that for now. So I do want to talk with you about Pecan Street. Many people throughout the state, many people of faith might not be aware of your work. Your mission is to accelerate the transition to clean, low-carbon energy and integrated water management through innovative technology and policy. So let's start with the why question, because I feel like a lot of times people of faith are interested in hearing why people decide to do this work. And as long as I've known you, climate was important, environmental policy was important. So I wonder if you'll start today by talking about the work of Pecan Street and why you've decided to devote 14 years so far of your career to this work.
Pecan Street's such a special place. And what I love about it is that we approach these pretty wonky issues, talking about technology innovation and big data and climate change mitigation. But we approach it from a heart of community. And not only doing community-based research where we ground all of the research that we do in understanding problems and getting a better lens on what are the drivers of different problems that we have in our society around the environment and also around equity. So we get into communities to really figure out what is that lived experience. But we also take that a step further, which is where Pecan Street is really unique in that we do community-based solutions development. So we work hand in hand with households that volunteer with us to also get feedback as technologies are being developed throughout that process, to get feedback on if this sort of thing were available, would you be interested in it? Would it solve problems for you? Okay, we've got prototypes ready. Can we come and put these in your home? And will you try it out for a little bit and tell us what you think about it? And then we also get data back on what's the actual economic impact to households from these different things like rooftop solar oriented to different directions and electric vehicles with different capabilities to coordinate with neighbors' homes. A whole host of cool technology things, but really trying to figure out how does this actually help households? And then not only the households that are likely to be, the first purchasers, the cool home on the block that's got some, disposable income, but how do we then take those technologies that do provide economic value and they do provide environmental value and make what works there affordable and available to households around the country where those problems exist? And then also, how do we think about optimizing investments that individual homes are able to make in things like electric vehicles and a Tesla Powerwall so that there's actually benefit to everybody on the grid that house is tied to? So that's what I really love Pecan Street is it's going a step further from thinking about what's cool, like what's the cool thing that can solve this problem to what's the thing that's actually going to help the most people? And then how do we make that happen quickly?
Texans of faith are worried both about the climate and the potential for the grid failing again. But there is some good news and there are some opportunities, right? We had Dr. Rhodes on in the last segment, and he talked about the hope that Texas could get to net zero while boosting the Texas economy. And so I wonder if you can provide us a word of hope today. Anything you're seeing in your research that we can draw on?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are definitely good reasons to remain concerned here as Texans. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. But also, it's absolutely a time of hope. And Dr. Rhodes' research came out, I think, at the perfect time to demonstrate that as we transition to clean energy and to a decarbonized power sector, that's not going to require sacrifices, that's actually just leveraging new technologies that are going to improve our existing energy infrastructure. So we like to think about clean energy as smart energy. Clean energy tends to have this really politicized association that it carries with it, especially in Texas. But actually what we're talking about are just modern ways of producing and managing energy. So it's, a horse and buggy transitioning to combustion vehicles moment for us here in power. And instead of looking at it as kind of a political decision or a sacrifice, what are we going to lose if we focus on addressing climate change? These technologies all actually solve a lot of multiple problems at once for us. And as Josh Rhodes pointed out in the paper that he recently produced, they provide huge economic opportunities for the state of Texas. And so the technologies are there. The opportunities are there, not only to solve problems here for our state and improve quality of life for all of Texans, but also to open up an entirely new, huge economic opportunity for Texans as well. So we want to make sure that we can capture this moment, that we don't lose out on this opportunity. And the only thing that's really missing in order for us to be able to move forward is the regulatory environment and the political will to do so. And that's why we're excited that there's more confluence happening around what do we see, what do we know about the state of technology, which is where my organization tends to focus. And then what do we need to do on the policy and the market structure side to really make sure that those smarter, newer technologies get a fair opportunity in the marketplace.
You talk about capturing the moment, and I wonder what listeners can do to help Texas capture this moment.
Yes, I love that question.
Thanks.
I think it's really important that as Texans that are trying to engage our political representatives, that we continue to beat the drum on grid reliability being really important to us and grid resilience, and not only for our own homes or our own communities, but also for less fortunate Texas and underserved communities. I think the data is out there now in the public domain that when we had Superstorm Uri last year hit Texas, households of color that lived in communities of color. So this was all census tract based data. We found that if you lived in a census tract that was majority Hispanic or African American, you had a 40% chance of losing power for a day or more during Uri. If you lived in a census tract that was majority white, you had a 10% chance that you lost power.
Oh, wow.
So there's a real racial difference here. And I'm not saying that that's racist policies, but I'm saying that we have a history of underinvestment in infrastructure for our communities of color that dates back to redlining and other policies like that, that we haven't been able to address. And it's expensive, but it does result in a real difference in how these kinds of extreme weather events and when the grid fails, who that's likely to impact and how. And it's likely to impact the households that are least able to afford it. And it's likely to impact those households more often. So it's important that we continue to let our political leaders know we care about this issue, that we continue to be worried about it, and that we want to see real solutions. We don't want to see more of the same, because that's not working. That didn't work. It continues to not work. Here in Austin, when we had our big heat wave last weekend, our lower income communities lost power when we were hot, and you need air conditioning to be healthy. So we continue to see that the solutions we have don't work, and we want political leaders that are going to present us with real options. And it's been, a year and a half now since Superstorm Uri, and we still don't have solutions. Right. So I think it is important that we continue to put pressure on what is that going to look like, and that we are all smart enough to know that clean energy is smart energy. Please stop politicizing these options that we have and taking them off the table. We need to look at every tool that's available to us to solve our problems in the most affordable and efficient way.
Is that the message that you would bring to legislators and candidates? Our listeners are always asking, what should we be talking to our representatives about? What should we be talking about with candidates in town halls? Is it just asking them the question, what is your solution? Is it clean energy now? Like what's the message that you hope they'd be taking to these conversations?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is when we're having these conversations specifically about power grid and how that ties into the social justice issues that are important to us as a faith-based community. Having the conversation with those candidates and with those policymakers about what are you looking at that's different? What are you going to give us that's not more of the same? And how are we utilizing these new technologies and these other tool sets that we have to really transform our power grid and not get left behind? In addition to just talking about clean energy, distributed renewables, by which we mean wind, solar, battery, even electric vehicles, we also in Texas approach our energy market really with just an eye towards supply side solutions. So just providing more generation. But actually, we have a lot of opportunity to address that as well from the demand side. So we can balance both supply and demand, but we're not looking at that at all in Texas. We only continue to look at supply side solutions. So there's a lot of opportunity for things like demand response programs, load shedding, load shifting programs, which are things that are kind of new. These are capabilities we've had for the past decade. Right. So I think it is harder sometimes for policymakers to want to invest time for themselves or their staff in understanding these newer technologies, but really we need to now. We're at a crisis point with our grid, and we can't afford to allow ourselves to stay ignorant. So I think the conversation is, how can we solve these grid problems in a way that also benefits more households and across demographic spectrums? And a lot of these demand side solutions are also ways to make power more affordable and give people more opportunities to benefit from our power system financially or economically, or to participate in a program that's going to reduce their overall energy cost and energy burden. So it's really pushing around, can we talk about what are you looking at beyond more natural gas capacity? It's asking, I think, that very specific question.
And I assume that you have some really great resources that people can use to prepare for those meetings online.
Yes, we do that. Thank you. We put out a paper a few months ago on the 1-year anniversary of Uri called Untapped in Texas, which brings in a lot of the research projects and technology field trials that Pecan Street has done over the past decade to get actual data and actual information from the real world about, look, these technologies, these solutions like demand response, like using electric vehicles for grid stability services, like solar, that those are all technologies that exist in the world that are ready to go. And here's how they benefit Texans. And let's actually start taking seriously policy that will help accelerate those solutions, or at least give us a chance to use all of the tools that are available to us. So that paper is one that anybody can go and download. And then we have some others around specifically talking about electric vehicle infrastructure. We have another paper that I highly recommend called the Race Energy Nexus, which tries to bring more facts to this conversation around racial justice within the energy space. We explore how race does interplay into energy burden and energy affordability, who gets to economically benefit from our energy sector, and how those past trends that have shown a lot of racial discrimination, or at least a big racialized difference in cost and opportunities and who bears the burdens of our energy sector and who benefits, how do we make sure that those don't get carried over into a clean energy economic system? So that one's also, I would recommend reading, because I think it's just good background if you really want to have an informed conversation about racial justice and the energy transition. To have some facts that can back that up is important.
And where do we find this information?
So that's at the Pecan Street website, which is pecanstreet.org. And if you want to go straight there, pecanstreet.org/publications.
Well, Suzanne, it has been so great spending just a few minutes with you today. Thanks for your incredible work. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to watch you grow and do some incredible work here in the state of Texas. So thanks for that, and thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure. And can I make one plug for Pecan Street?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, Pecan Street's a nonprofit organization. We're based here in Austin, but we do work around the country. And where we're unique is that we work not only on community-based research around climate issues, but we do community-based solutions development. And to do that, we recruit households to volunteer with us, and we will instrument those homes with different sensors that give us a lot of this data that we then use to create the kind of research that I described a few minutes ago, but also to partner with different universities and different companies to really understand what are the existing problems that need to be solved in a way that helps households. So we're always looking for more volunteers that want to work with us. And if anybody's interested in learning more, we've got all the resources on our website, but we also are always happy to jump on a phone call or exchange emails with anyone that's interested in learning about our work.
Excellent. So friends, take the challenge, call Suzanne, call Pecan Street. It'd be a great opportunity. Thanks again for the time today.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
I want to thank our guests today, Reverend Sam Brannon, Dr. Joshua Rhodes, and Suzanne Russo. But I especially want to thank you for tuning in. We have real challenges in the climate crisis, but also have real opportunities for hope if we choose to take them. I hope today's episode gives you tools to maybe think about and talk about the climate opportunities and innovations in a way that inspires others to act. So I hope you'll share the important content in this episode with your friends and congregations. Y'all, we can do this, but we'll need Texans of faith engaging on the issues, both in our faith communities and with our elected representatives. And with that, it's time to draw this episode to a close. If you've stayed with us this long, you must have enjoyed the content. So hope you'll share it with your friends and congregations and leave us a rating or review. That way, even more of your friends can find us and join in the movement for justice in Texas. And there is a lot going on, so keep an eye on Texas Impact social media for upcoming announcements, or email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members of Texas Impact by going to texasimpact.org. Friends, these are wild times, and 2022 is an important year for democracy, our communities, and our planet. The world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.